Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Nature Live Online. I'm Alison. I'm your host for today. Now, if you're new to Nature Live, we're an event that happens weekly from the Natural History Museum where we give you a chance to meet and speak with some of the scientific staff that work behind the scenes at the museum. Now, we have opened our doors to the public, which is very exciting, but not everyone can safely be at the museum. So instead, what we're doing is bringing our science and our scientists direct to you at home. Now, today's topic is snakes. We're going to be finding out all about these amazing animals and their adaptations, and also why they've been in the news recently. Now, to guide us through, I'm going to be joined by one of our curators, Jeff. Now, remember, we are live, so this is your opportunity to ask your questions too. Don't be shy. If you've got a question about snakes, pop it in the comments. We'll do our very best to answer as many of your questions as we can in the time that we have. But let's meet our speaker for today. Jeff, are you there?
I am. Good morning.
Hey, it's good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Jeff, let's start first of all by finding out what you do at the museum.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, I'm a curator at the museum, and I work in the herpetology section, which is the study of amphibians and reptiles. So my main job is to take care of our collection of amphibian and reptile specimens, while also providing access to it from scientific visitors from all over the world. And I also help supervise postgraduate students and postdoctoral scholars while working with the team at the museum to do original research too. So we're trying to facilitate and make as many discoveries as we can using our collections.
And it's such a brilliant collection as well, such a fantastic resource. And I'm particularly loving the picture of you there in our collection. I love that building so much.
Yeah, I remember those times when we used to be at the museum.
Oh, we'll be back soon. We'll be back soon.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, I hope so.
Now, Jeff, we're going to focus today on snakes. So we should probably start with a few basics. What exactly is a snake and what are they related to?
So I think most people are familiar with what a snake looks like, but to be technical about it, snakes are reptiles, which means that they're close relatives of turtles, the tuatara from New Zealand, crocodiles, and birds. They're most closely related to lizards, as you can see a few in this picture here. And in fact, lizards and snakes together make up a group that we call squamata in taxonomic terms. And what's really interesting is that some types of lizards are actually more closely related to snakes than they are to other lizards. So in that sense, we can kind of think of snakes as these really specialized lizards. And in terms of what makes a snake and makes it different from other lizards, it's really a combination of characteristics. So they're typically limbless. We all recognize snakes don't have any arms or legs. I say typically because there are some species of snake, like pythons, that have the vestiges of legs in their skeletons, but they're limbless. They don't have external ear openings. So if you were to look at the side of the head of a snake, you'd just see smooth scales. And they also have this incredible forked tongue that you see in this lovely picture of a snake from Ecuador here. And they use that tongue to actually, believe it or not, smell the world around them. Now, there are some limbless lizards, as we saw on the previous slide. There are some lizards that don't have ear openings. And there are some lizards that have these lovely forked tongues we were just talking about. But it's really only snakes that have these three combination of characteristics. So I guess that is what makes them snaky.
Absolutely brilliant. And that tongue is incredibly sensitive, isn't it? And so they don't hear in the same way as we do then without ears.
They don't. They can hear and they can sense vibrations, but they use a different part of their skull than we do to detect sound.
Very cool animals. And how many species are there in the world? Do we know?
We have a pretty good idea. Although new species of snake are described every year, in fact, just this year at the museum, some of our scientists have described some new species of snake. As of this time last year, the official count, and we have the statistics on this obviously, was 3,789 species of living snake. That's a pretty incredible number, because if you think about them and their relatives, the lizards, there are about 10,000, just about over 10,000 species of those two groups of reptiles. So given that there are almost 4,000 species of snakes, that means that about 1 in every 3 species of squamate reptile is a snake. So there are loads of living species of snakes.
That is impressive. For many people, that will be about 3,000 species too many. Some people aren't too keen, are they? Do we know when snakes first evolved?
We actually have a pretty good idea. There's quite the fossil record for snakes. A lot of the fossils are just vertebrae. They seem to preserve particularly well, but we do also have some really well-preserved entire snakes that are more or less complete. And the available evidence suggests that the earliest non-controversial snake, so one that if we were to ask your average paleontologist or herpetologist, they would say, yeah, that's a snake. The oldest non-controversial snake comes from the late Cretaceous. And so that's about 100 million years ago. And to put that to give you a frame of reference for that, that's around the same time period that Tyrannosaurus Rex is roaming the plains of North America. So if you think about it, the snakes, their ancestors have been around since Tyrannosaurus Rex, and if they weren't under the feet of Tyrannosaurus Rex, they were probably swimming in the ocean just adjacent to where they lived.
That's absolutely incredible, isn't it? And you mentioned snakes in the ocean there. So what sort of habitats do we find them in? Are they pretty much everywhere?
They're in a lot of different places. So just like fossil snakes, we also still have some living snake species that live in the oceans. So we have marine snakes, the sea snakes, but they're found in a diversity of habitats on land as well. Places like deserts that normally you'd think would be so hot and so difficult for species to live in. A lot of snakes have managed to make their lives there. You find them in rainforests. You find them in temperate environments like we have here in London. And you even find them in surprisingly cold places that you would expect a cold-blooded animal to have a difficult time occupying. So places like inside the Arctic Circle, where one species of viper is known to occur.
Wow, that is incredible. I had no idea. They are amazing. Now, of course, we've mentioned lots of people are not huge fans of snakes,
Sure.
but
Fair
you
enough.
love them. What is it about snakes that you find so brilliant?
Well, I think what I personally find really fascinating about snakes are the range of adaptations they have. For an animal that's essentially just a scaled tube, if you will, they have evolved an amazing array of unique adaptations to help them get food, avoid predation, and survive in all of those different habitats that I just mentioned. And so here's a great example in this picture of a cobra from South Africa. This classic hood that I think all of us recognize is associated with a cobra is modified ribs in the upper part of its body that it uses to make itself look bigger and threatening. And I think in a moment we're going to talk about a few more of these incredible adaptations that snakes have that really, I think, are the core reason that I love them so much.
Absolutely. Yeah, we are going to focus on those adaptations. And of course, we have to talk about Venom. Already we've got quite a few questions from our viewers about Venom. They are renowned, you might say notorious for their venom, aren't they, snakes? But how many species are actually venomous? What snakes use venom?
So there are, I guess a rough answer is there are hundreds of different snake species that use venom, and they use it in very different ways. Some are much more toxic than others. They eat a wide variety of things. But the classic venomous snake species that I think a lot of us recognize are snakes like the cobras we just saw on the previous slide, sea snakes, vipers like we can see in this current slide, a variety of different vipers, and coral snakes like this brightly colored species that we see in the slide in front of us here. Among venomous snakes, there's also some standouts that I like to mention that have some really incredible adaptations they've evolved, and that includes the North American rattlesnakes and the spider-tailed horn viper from Iran.
That is amazing. That's the animal that featured recently on one of the BBC. I think it was Seven Worlds, One Planet.
It's incredible. So yeah, they use this incredible tail that they've got to essentially lure in birds, and then they can strike them, allow their venom to work, and then get a meal. Just incredible.
It's amazing. It's like a spider mimic, isn't it? It's
yeah, absolutely. It's mimicking something the bird might want to eat. And I mean, similarly, the rattlesnakes, the way they use their rattles to ward off potential predators, it's just, fascinating what vipers have done with the backside of their body.
And how do snakes produce their venom? Because some animals get their toxins from the environment, from their food, don't they?
Right. So snakes are a little bit different. They make their own venoms, and it's actually produced in specialized glands in their head. You can think about the venom overall itself. It's essentially like a modified saliva, right? And in that saliva is a host of proteins that the snake itself is making by expressing special genes that they have in their genomes. And there can be a lot of different types of proteins depending on the species of snake and the type of venom.
It's fascinating. We've had a question from YouTube. Sophie would like to know, a very good question actually, what's the difference between being poisonous and being venomous?
Hi, Sophie. Thanks for the question. So I think what most toxicologists how they would define those terms is that a poisonous animal is something that is just producing a toxin, right? And a venomous animal is also producing a toxin or sequestering it from the environment, like you mentioned, Allison. But a venomous animal is different from a poisonous animal because it has some mechanism to inject that toxin into either a prey item, something it wants to eat, or into a potential predator, something that's trying to eat it. And so those would be the main differences, I think.
So if it's venomous, it bites you. If it's poisonous, you bite it.
Yes, that's a great way to put it.
And are there different types of venom that snakes produce?
Absolutely. That specialized saliva venom is a cocktail of many different toxins, and as I mentioned, it varies species to species. Some of the toxins that you have in snake venom, some of our viewers might have heard of before. So these are things called neurotoxins and hemotoxins. And as their name suggests, they do different things once they're injected into a prey item or a predator. Neurotoxins affect the nervous system, typically causing paralysis in what the snake bites. Hemotoxins affect the circulatory system. So that's your blood flowing through your body, and they cause clotting and destroy red blood cells. But these are just two kind of categories, classes of toxins that snakes make. They make others as well, including kind of a more general group called the cytotoxins that essentially just rupture cells as the proteins move through the body. So yeah, there's quite a variety of venoms that these snakes produce.
We had an interesting question from Hannah on YouTube about a specific snake, the mamba. She wanted to know what mamba venom does to the human body.
Mamba venom is, some species at least, it's a neurotoxin, so it's affecting your nervous system. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's actually, I think we're going to talk about it maybe a little bit later, but there are some really interesting things we've learned from mamba venom that relate to our health.
Yeah, we'll come back to that a little bit later. Natalie on YouTube was also interested in the mamba again. She wanted to know how fast that particular snake is. Do we know? Is that a particularly speedy one?
So I don't know exactly how fast they are. I'm thinking they are. Most snakes, like mambas, are capable of great bursts of speed. I don't know if anyone's done. Someone has probably done the research to actually track how fast they're capable of moving. I don't know, but I would say from seeing footage of them, it's quite quick.
Absolutely. And we had a question from a viewer on Periscope, probably a question many of us are wanting to know. Which snake is the most venomous? There are a few contenders.
Yeah, there are. And I think the answer kind of depends on how you define most venomous. So venomous snakes eat many different types of prey. Some specialize in reptiles, others in mammals. And so depending on what they eat, it's really their venom might be very specialized for that particular prey item. So a snake that specializes in lizards might have a really dangerous venom for a lizard, but if it bites an animal like us, it might not bother us that much. Mm-hmm. So in terms of the most venomous species, usually when people say that, we're thinking about, for mammals, what's the most dangerous snake venom and dangerous snake species. And I think if we're thinking about it in terms of the actual potency per volume of venom, the winner at the moment is the western browns. Is the inland taipan, which we've got a picture of here in the genus Oxyuranus, and it's got one of the more deadly venom. It has the most deadly venom for mammals in small quantities from experiments they've done with mice. And yeah, I would say this is our winner at the moment.
And where do we find this snake?
It's found in Australia. Home to many venomous. animals.
Of course. Had to be Australia. We've had a question on YouTube, again linked to venom, but asking, do fossil snakes have evidence of being venomous, or is that like to be something that evolved later?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. I mean, I don't know, and because soft tissues don't preserve in fossils, it's a little bit difficult to have direct evidence of the venom system in snakes. Their teeth do fossilize, and I don't know if there's any evidence of old fangs, if you will, in fossil snakes. But using comparisons across species, we actually can estimate when venom evolved by looking at how different species are related to one another. And we know it evolved very early in snake evolution, and it particularly is associated with a big radiation called the advanced snakes, where you see these really specialized venoms. So this group includes the vipers and the elapids, the cobras and the sea snakes and things. But to go a little bit deeper, the ultimate origins of venom in not just snakes, but also their lizard relatives, we have good evidence now goes back even further to the origins of this group that are sometimes called the Toxicophora. And there are some surprising species that are in the Toxicophora that you might not consider to be venomous, like the iguana, for example, but also some other reptiles like the Gila monster and the beaded lizard, which are very venomous. And so all of these species together have a lot of the glands that we know became very specialized in some groups of snakes. So the origins of venom in squamate reptiles happened a long time ago.
And we've had another great question from YouTube this time, asking how big can the fangs get? I think we've got an image of
I think that was an excellent setup. So the winner at the moment for absolute fang size is the gaboon viper. And the gaboon viper's fang, for its body size, is quite large. I mean, they can get, I've seen some in collections that are about yay big. Oh, here's the picture. They're massive. And they're so long, they're part of a type of snake fang called a selenoglyphus snake fang. They've got to fold back in their mouth when the mouth is closed. They're so long.
They are absolutely incredible. Very, very intimidating. Now, but not all snakes, of course, produce venom, do they? In fact, most do. So what are some of the other ways that they catch prey? Some of our larger snakes, they constrict, don't they? What's that all about?
That's right. So many viewers might have seen images or videos of snakes like the python or the boa constrictor, as its name implies, that actually grab their prey item and then wrap around it really tight and squeeze it. So these are constrictors, right? And it's a feeding mechanism that's fairly common among different snake species. It's usually associated with snakes that eat mammals. But there are also snakes that specialize on reptiles that do it as well.
And how does constriction actually work?
So a lot of people might think that it has to do with suffocation, but it's really more about stopping the flow of blood to the heart and brain of the prey item. And so the breathing is involved, because every time the prey item takes a breath, the snake's able to squeeze tighter, and then that keeps the animal from continuing to breathe, right? That it's grabbed onto. But constriction works by stopping blood flow to the heart and brain until eventually the prey item dies and the snake can eat it.
Wow, it's incredible. Now, we tend to think of the big snakes, don't we, when it comes to constriction, like the boa pythons. Do smaller snakes do it too?
They do, and here's a great example here. This is a western brown snake, another thing from Australia, which is maybe 1/20th the size of the biggest python or something like that, but it also uses constriction. And in this particular case, this is an interesting one because this species uses constriction, but here you can see it eating a blue-tongued skink. Unlike mammals that have a high oxygen requirement, so constriction is going to be really effective, this snake also uses venom in combination with constriction to subdue its prey items that include some reptiles like this. Those snakes, there are small snakes that constrict, but a lot of small snakes don't constrict. And a lot of small snakes just eat their food whole. And they'll actually, they use the the fact that most of their teeth are curved backwards, and that allows a really good grip on prey items. And so they can grab onto the prey item, be it a lizard or another small animal, and then just kind of work it back into their mouth.
They are obviously renowned for being able to swallow their prey whole, aren't they? We had a question on YouTube a bit earlier asking if the snakes can dislocate their jaws to make them bigger. How does it work?
Right. So that's a very common question. And the secret to how snakes can eat their prey whole really is about their specializations of their heads, right? And their skulls. So if we were to look at the skull of a snake, the first thing you might notice about it is that the mandibles, the bones on the bottom of the skull here, they're not connected. We also have mandibles, but if you touch your chin here, you can feel that there's actually this symphysis, this bony hard bit that connects the two mandibles, fuses them together. And unlike us, snakes don't have that. Instead, these mandibles are connected in the front by these really stretchy bits of connective tissue or ligaments. And so that gives them this flexibility, this range of motion that we don't have. So that's key number one to their ability to kind of get their mouth open a little bit wider than, say, we might be able to. And the second key to their success is another adaptation of their skull, which is the quadrate bone. And the back of the snake skull is very special compared to most vertebrates. And you can actually see it on the picture on the left here, that long skinny bone that connects to the mandible. That has this massive range of motion, which gives the snake another axis how it can move its mouth. And so it essentially can not only spread the front of its mouth, it can also open it to the side, kind of like this, to really move down a big prey item that may be, I don't know, like 4 times the size of its head or something like that.
Yeah, it's amazing. So they can open like this way and that way.
Yeah.
Flexible.
Very flexible, but they're not, to get back to the question, they're actually dislocating anything. It's just the flexibility that these bones provide. And they do have independent movement too. Because of how they're not connected, they can really get some specialized movement to cater to whatever they've grabbed.
And while we've got the skeleton here, let's take a closer look at the entire snake skeleton, because that is really amazing, isn't it?
It's incredible. And this image, I think, really highlights not only that, the snakes are essentially a giant vertebral column. They're just all ribs and vertebrae, right? But it also gives us some insight into how larger snake species like this python can take such massive prey items like a rabbit or a deer, a small deer even, that the bottoms of their bodies don't have any cartilaginous or hard elements. And so these ribs can kind of just lift up and give way for big food items to pass under after they've passed that stretchy mouth and move onwards in the digestive system. So they really are, they've got incredible adaptations for eating massive meals. Absolutely.
We had a question earlier, I think, about them being able to flatten their ribs. Is that right? Can they?
Yeah, sure. So they can flatten their ribs, and the degree to which they can do that varies a lot by species. We already saw the example of the cobra, where we talked about those specialized ribs that make the hood. But there are lots of snake species that do a similar kind of flattening of their ribs like that to make them look more threatening by being bigger. There's even some that have brightly colored interstitial or in between the scales tissues that are only exposed when they spread out their ribs on their neck to ward off predators. And so, yeah, there's a lot of rib flattening going on around the snake tree of life.
There's just been a couple more questions from our viewers that I wanted to get to before we move on. Abby, aged 10, asked, do some snakes lie waiting to ambush their prey? Is that quite a common tactic?
Yeah, absolutely. And we particularly see that in the species that have really toxic venoms. They'll sit and wait until something walks by that they're interested in eating, and they detect it either by smelling it with those specialized forked tongues that pick up scent molecules, or using these specialized heat-sensing pits that they have in their faces. So there are plenty of sit and wait predation. There's plenty of sit and wait predation that happens in snakes, and some species like pythons also do it too. So yeah.
And a great question from Hannah on Facebook, age 10, thinking more about the evolution of snakes and Titanoboa.
Oh, yeah.
Real snake, did that live?
Titanoboa was indeed a real snake that lived in Colombia a very long time ago, but it's the example of the largest living snake that we have evidence of having. Yeah, here's a great museum display of it, of swallowing a crocodile. But they were massive. They were, I think, more than twice the size of the largest living snakes we've got now. And it's really interesting because before Titanoboa was discovered, the largest fossil snake that we thought we knew about has a great name. It's called Gigantophus. So yeah, I don't know, for maybe just a fun fact that you can share with your friends, Gigantophus and Titanoboa are both examples of these huge extinct snakes that used to roam our planet in places that are now Colombia and northern Africa.
Wow, incredible. I'm quite glad that they are no longer roaming our planet.
Sure, I mean, the herpetologist in me would be really excited to see one, but I can understand that some people might not like that.
Now, we mentioned earlier that snakes had been in the news in recent months, and we've had a very relevant question through on YouTube asking, can snakes transmit diseases? That's very topical, isn't it? So Jeff, tell us about why they've been in the news and about this disease angle.
So I think, like many of us, snakes have been brought into the predominant thing that many of us are thinking about right now, which is the pandemic, which is coronavirus. And in late January, when things were starting to happen and the virus was starting to spread, and we were trying to learn more about it, there was a big push for scientists to figure out what other animal species that the coronavirus might have come from before it jumped into humans, because other coronaviruses jump from another species into humans that way. And around late January, a scientific paper was published in the Journal of Medical Virology that implied snakes might be the origin of the virus. And this was, this got a lot of headlines, as you've got up here, but almost immediately other scientists were skeptical that snakes could actually be the origin of COVID-19 for two important reasons. First of all, the other coronaviruses that I just mentioned that have had serious implications for human health, like SARS and MERS, they originated in birds and mammals. And so a cold-blooded non-avian reptile was an unexpected initial host for the virus. And second, the best evidence for identifying where COVID-19 came from would be to observe the coronavirus in the animal species it came from. And we would do that by matching its genetic sequence. You see the RNA that lives inside the virus here, okay? The best way would be to actually match that genetic sequence to the genetic sequence from the COVID that infects people. But the virologist in the snake study did not directly observe it this way. They didn't find RNA from the coronavirus, or even the coronavirus for itself, for that matter, in snakes. They instead used indirect evidence to link the snake and the virus together. So this caused a lot of scientists to be skeptical.
So what would be the difference between direct and indirect evidence? What would be a good analogy?
So I think a good example would involve footprints on a beach. So you might want to know, for any number of reasons, if a person has walked across a particular stretch of beach. If we actually can see the person walking across that stretch of beach, as you see in the left-hand image here, that's direct evidence that a person's on the beach, because you can see the person. That's great. Now, if you arrive at the beach and you don't see any people around, but you do see footprints, like in the middle image that we've got here, this is indirect evidence that a person was on the beach. Given how much we know about footprints, though, and the shape of human feet, it's still pretty compelling evidence that a person was on the beach. So I think most people would say, yeah, somebody walked through here. If you imagine a third scenario, which we have on the picture on the right, imagine you arrive at the beach and you kind of see a lot of marks in the sand, but they don't really look like feet. They're not very clear. And then you have to ask, were these marks made by a person walking? Well, they could have been, but because the marks aren't well defined, they could have been caused by something else too. We can't rule that out, like wind blowing across the beach. And this is where indirect evidence can be less than convincing, when there are multiple explanations for the evidence you're looking at. Mm-hmm. So the last example of the beach is a good analogy for why most scientists are skeptical about snakes being the origin of COVID-19, because the evidence was based on similarities between the molecular machinery of COVID-19 and the molecular machinery of snakes, and wasn't actually based on scientists collecting coronavirus from snakes or sequencing its genetic code out of snakes.
So COVID, very unlikely to have originated in snakes. But can snakes get viruses? Can a snake catch a cold?
So that's a very interesting extension to this conversation, which is that, yes, snakes, just like us, can get sick, and they do get viruses. And it's actually, we know a lot about these snake viruses now because hopefully some people watching, snake enthusiasts out there, are keeping snakes as pets. And, you know, we all love our pets, and when they get sick, we want to make them better. And so because more people are keeping snakes as pets, we've learned a lot about the viruses that snakes get from veterinary research of people that want to help their snakes get better. And what that's taught us is that just like us, snakes get a lot of different viruses, many of them very similar to human viruses, and they cause them to get sick in similar ways. For example, there's something called a nidovirus that snakes get. It's a close relative of coronavirus, and it causes the same disease symptoms in snakes that we see coronavirus causing in humans. It causes pneumonia. It can be fatal. And so we do know that snakes get viruses just like people do, and it does make them sick.
Wow, and they're not just interesting from a disease point of view, are they, these viruses? To scientists, they're interesting for other reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a really exciting kind of way that viruses and animals like snakes are teaching us about the past and what our planet looked like before we were around to document it. There's a whole field that's developed in the last decade or so called paleovirology, and it's based on some viruses that are called retroviruses that actually insert themselves, their genetic code, into their host genome as a way to infect them and replicate themselves. And because they actually become part of their host genome, that viral DNA sequence can get stuck in the host genome and be inherited by the host's offspring for generations and generations. And while it's not dangerous necessarily to the offspring, because these viruses often get inactivated, these viral sequences, this means that the genetic code of ancient and now extinct viruses may be fossilized, if you will, in the genomes of living animals. And so these viral fossils in many animal genomes, like snake genomes and even our own, have gotten a lot of scientists very excited about understanding what types of viruses existed in the past. And another reason that they're quite exciting is because the easier it is for us to sequence whole genomes from different animals, the location of these ancient viruses might actually teach us something about how evolution occurred. So it's really exciting to know not only that we have these new tools that are emerging, but for me personally, snakes might be on the forefront of this emerging research because our early reports indicate their genomes have plenty of these viral fossils.
Wow. Fossil viruses, extinct fossil viruses in your... That's amazing. That's an area of science I had not even considered. Well, Jeff, we've got lots more questions coming in from our viewers, so I'll just go through some of those. So we've got a question in from Alison, a different Alison. Hi, Alison, YouTube, saying that some snakes lay eggs and some snakes give birth to live young. Do we know when the differences evolved?
The giving birth to live young, viviparity, has evolved a few times in snakes and other squamate reptiles for that matter. But it's quite remarkable. There are many species of snake, they give live birth and nourish their young in a very similar way to mammals do. But the short answer to that question is just kind of like the venom we were talking about earlier. We think it evolved pretty early on, but a lot of the earliest diverging snakes are egg-laying. It's a bit difficult to know what happened first, but we do know that having these different modes of reproduction has been around for quite a while.
And that we had we mentioned this a bit earlier, right at the beginning, but we've had a couple of questions, people asking about how snakes can hear. So just remind us, because they don't have ears, do they?
Yeah, so they pick up vibrations using some of the bones in their skull, and so they'll often kind of like lay their head on a surface, and that's one way that they can detect sound. There's been a lot of really detailed sensory research into understanding how snakes can hear. So if you're interested, there is lots of information out there for you to know more about the nuances and different ways that snakes might experience their acoustic environments.
Very interesting. And while we're on the subject of senses, we had a question from Facebook asking whether snakes have good eyesight.
Yeah, so snakes have very interesting eyes. They don't blink. So that's another kind of interesting thing about snakes. They've got a scale that covers their eye that keeps it open all the time. And most snakes don't have fantastic vision in terms of acuity, like we would think about it, seeing things very clearly. And that kind of relates to the fact that they've got these other incredible senses of smell and heat sensing, like I mentioned in some of the other snakes that have the pits. But they do have lots of interesting things that have happened during the evolution of their eyes, including the change of some of the photoreceptors that are on the retina of their eyes. Because some scientists think that the ancestor of all these living snakes we're talking about was burrowing. And we know that a lot of burrowing animals, the longer they spend underground evolutionarily, the smaller and smaller their eyes get until they may completely disappear. You think about something like a naked mole rat or something like that. And so some evolutionary biologists think that the ancestor of modern snakes came out of that environment and essentially had to rebuild its eyes like its ancestor before they became fossorial had. And consistent with that, in a way, there's a lot of really unique things about those photoreceptors in their eyes. So I guess it would depend which snake species you're looking at, how good its vision is. And there are certainly a few that have pretty decent vision for actually tracking prey, not with their tongue, but with their eyes. So yeah, they can have good vision, but I'd say typically they don't.
And earlier we saw Titanoboa, one of the biggest snakes that ever lived. We had a question from YouTube though, asking how small is the smallest snake?
That's a fantastic question. Let's not forget about the small things.
Oh.
So the smallest snake that we know about now is a what's called a blind or a thread snake. This is a snake that comes from the West Indies. And this small species of snake, it's in the genus Leptotyphlops, and at its maximum adult size, it's just about 10 centimeters. So that's just under 4 inches, right? So if you think about that compared to something like Titanoboa, or even some living species like the reticulated python that can get over 6 meters long, that's quite a disparity in the adult body size that the snakes get.
Even if you don't like snakes, I think you can agree that that little snake is super, super cute.
It's pretty adorable.
So we have the smallest there. What is the biggest living snake? Is it one of the boas or?
Well, I guess it depends on how you define the biggest snake. If you're talking about length or if you're talking about mass, like how heavy they are, because depending on which, the answer is different. For the longest snake, I just mentioned it, is the reticulated python. And the heaviest snake is the anaconda from South America. So these are the contenders for the world's largest living snake at the moment. The longest on the right and the heaviest on the left, depending on what kind of big you're thinking of.
Pretty impressive, pretty impressive. Now, we had a question from Heather on Facebook asking about snakes in the UK. Is there a snake in the UK that can kill you, that is dangerous, or are we pretty safe?
Well, so short answer, yes, we're pretty safe. I mean, there are some snakes that live in the UK, which I think is great. Not as many as most places in the world, but we do have at least 4 that are fairly common, 3 native and 1 that's established a breeding population, actually here in London. But the native species are the smooth snake, which is found in the south of England, the grass snake, which is found throughout the UK, and the adder. So the smooth snake and the grass snake are not dangerous to people. The adder is venomous. It's a viper. It's in the same family as the rattlesnake and the spider-tailed horned viper we talked about earlier. But in terms of toxicity, they are very low down on the chart. Also, they live in very specialized heathland habitats, and they typically really like to avoid people. So I would say that even if you see an adder and are enjoying it from a safe distance, you're quite safe. And the last kind of snake that we've got in the UK with established breeding populations is this Aesculapian snake, where there's been an established population in the canals outside of London Zoo that they've been monitoring for a few years now.
And we had a very interesting question from Eleanor on Facebook. She'd like to know if snakes sleep.
That's a good question. Do snakes sleep? So I am sure there is a snake physiologist that knows the exact answer to this question. I do not, but most reptiles will go through periods of dormancy, or they're resting a lot, right? And some even go through extended torpor, kind of like hibernation. And these are those that live in places where it gets very cold during one time of the year, and as they're cold-blooded and they need to get their heat from the environment, they go below the freezing line and just really drop their metabolism down to levels that would be far below what ours are when we're sleeping. So I guess, yeah, metabolically speaking, they do go through periods of extreme rest.
But who knows if they dream?
That is a good question. We should ask some snakes. We need to get to the bottom of this.
And we've had a couple of questions about what snakes and water. So there was a question on YouTube asking why some snakes live underwater. Why that environment? And then a question from Andrew on Facebook wanted to know, hypothetically, how big a snake could get, and would it have to live in water to get very big?
Oh, right. Okay. So the water question was, why do some snakes live completely inside the water? Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess the short answer is that their ancestors evolved to exploit a niche that kept them going. And in some cases some of the sea snakes that are mostly pelagic or floating around in the open ocean. So a species like the yellow-bellied sea snake or something like that, where if it washes up on a beach, it can't move around because its muscles are too weak for terrestrial locomotion. Essentially those are around because the ocean gives them enough of what they need, and they've evolved adaptations to cope with living life in the ocean in terms of managing salt intake to their bodies and swimming along in an efficient manner. So I guess it kind of like how certain mammals evolved into cetaceans to whales and dolphins. That the same things happened in some snakes to an extent. And then I guess the second question was about the upper body size limit of snakes. Well, I guess it would all depend. This is very hypothetical here, right? So this is, take this with a grain of salt. I think there are biomechanics to consider. And so when I say that, what I mean is thinking about what type of skeletal structure the snake has, what type of muscles it has. So the bigger you get, if you have the right supporting structures and the right musculature, so you think about how big some of the dinosaurs got, and against their environment where it might have been warmer and slightly more oxygenated, there are a lot of factors to consider. For current conditions, I have no idea what the upper size range would be, but I could imagine if you were really beefy snake, really muscular, you could get quite large and still move around on land. But like the yellow-bellied sea snake, if you had prioritized getting bigger but not investing energy in those muscles and those bones to support your big body, you might only be able to make it in the ocean.
Yeah. Great questions. We're almost out of time, but I do want to squeeze one more in from Lily and Isla on YouTube, because they would like to know, what is Jeff's favorite snake?
What's my favorite? Thank you for asking. That's so kind of you. My favorite snake. Oh, I wasn't prepared for this. There are so many. Okay, I can do this. Jeff's favorite snake in the world is probably. I'm starting to hyperventilate. I'm gonna go with rattlesnake, and that's just because for me personally, I've worked with some of my collaborators to describe some new rattlesnakes. And there's some really interesting things going on with their DNA. So that, from my personal perspective, I would say that it's rattlesnakes. But even though their rattle is really cool, I get more excited about their DNA. Man, that was stressful.
We 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 gave you a really stressful one just at the end, but you cope with it very, very well.
Oh, thanks. Great question. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been brilliant chatting to you today. The snakes, they get a bad reputation, but they are pretty amazing, aren't they?
Yeah, they do. And I think it's important for people to remember that they're quite beneficial in a variety of ways. Snakes that live nearby where we do a great service to us by eating animals that might cause disease for us. So particularly snakes that eat rodents, mice, and rats that could carry diseases that could infect us. They play a really important role not only in the ecosystem, but also in mitigating risks to our health. And then I think even the venomous snakes that we want to respect from a distance, they're also incredibly beneficial to us. And we've used the natural qualities of these really complex venoms they've evolved to help us benefit ourselves in terms of medicine, not only treating blood, but also nerve disorders. And I think we mentioned the mambas earlier in this talk, and that's a great example of how black mamba venom, the neurotoxin properties of it, they've been able to separate out bits of it where they can use it as a painkiller in humans. And it's a painkiller that's been demonstrated to be more effective than morphine and not have any of the negative side effects. And so I think in that way, snakes are incredibly beneficial to have around for us to learn more about and also enjoy them in nature.
Definitely. Oh, Jeff, it's been brilliant talking to you today. We are very definitely out of time, I'm afraid, but thank you so much for
having me.
Snakes and their amazing adaptations, and hopefully we'll have you back on for another talk soon and get you back to the museum as well, back into that spirit building.
I can't wait. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jeff. Bye. And thank you to all of you, our viewers, for your brilliant questions and for keeping Jeff on his toes there with that question about his favourite snake. Do join us again. We are here every week, every Tuesday and every Friday. Next Tuesday at 12, we're going to be talking woolly mammoths and other ice age giants. And we've also got to talk at 10:30 next Friday on dinosaurs. So make sure you join us. Keep an eye on our website and our social media feeds for updates on what's coming next. Thank you again. Have a lovely day and a wonderful weekend. And we hope to see you again soon.